In general, cactus and succulent propagation follows some of the same methods that are used in other types of propagation, the cuttings, stem cuttings that we've been using for other non-cactus and succulent perennials so far in this class. In this lecture, I'll tell you about propagation of cacti and succulents with seeds and also with stem cuttings and a couple of those methods that are unique to succulent and cacti species for propagation. What exactly are cacti and succulents? Well, cacti is a plant family called the Cactaceae, or you can just say cactus family. And you know what they are just by looking at them, pretty much. You may not know the difference between certain cacti and succulents, but it doesn't really matter. The thing that matters most as far as propagation goes is understanding that these types of plants, whether they be cactus or succulents, have water-filled stems. So they're thick, fleshy, water-retaining stems. They often have specialized leaves, spines, or tiny leaves that come seasonally and fall off quickly. Some of them are epiphytic in tropical climates. You'll see epiphytic means plants that grow on other plants, like bromeliads are native and their natural habitat is growing on the branches of larger trees. And cacti in general have the swollen stems and leaves and roots that are meant to expand when water is available. So both cactus and succulents are, in this discussion, are the type of plant that has those fleshy, thick leaves, but they're not in the cactus family. Cactus family plants also have thick, fleshy stems, and they are both adapted to dry climates where you get periodic heavy rain, like a monsoon rain in the desert, or thunderstorms. So once in a while there's a lot of rain, they got to absorb it quickly, and then they have to hang on to that water for a long time until through the dry season, the heat, until the next periodic rainstorm comes along. So both groups, cactus and succulents, have the same growth form. They have these thick fleshy stems, even though they're not taxonomically closely related. So there are a number of families that would be in the succulent group. Succulent isn't a technical botanical family. It's just a group of plants that tend to have those fleshy, water-filled stems and leaves. Cactus is its own family. So we've got the cactus family and then a bunch of different other families in the plant world that make up cactus and succulents that need these methods of propagation. An example of a plant from the cactus family is Schlumbergera. It's a Christmas cactus. It's pretty well known because it's a house plant. It can do well outside here in Southern California and Southwestern United States if it doesn't get too cold. And it blooms around what is our holiday in the winter time, around the Christmas holiday. It has these flattened, fleshy stem segments. They're not technically leaves, but they're parts of the stem, but they photosynthesize and they also hold the plant up. So they are stems and they're full of water. So it's a cactus. And what makes it a cactus in the cactus family is its flower morphology, the shape of the flower, not really the leaves, but the fact that it is fleshy, and you would propagate it in the same methods used as in other cactus and succulents, puts it into the category of this lecture. This plant, although we see it in houses and pots and all over our nation, we've seen it even in the Midwest where I used to live, people have this inside on their table and it blooms around December. It's native to the coastal mountains of southeast Brazil, grows on rocks and trees, so it's epiphytic, growing up on top of other things in shady and high humid warm climates. So again, an indoor plant unless you're in a warm climate. Succulents, like I said, come from a wide range of families. So in all of these plant families, and the plant families are categorized mostly by their flower morphology. If their flowers have similar shape, the same number of stamens, pistil, petals, that's what is one of the strongest factors that makes a family in plants a family, is their flower morphology. Genetics also further refine those. Growth form somewhat, But within a family of plants, you can have a diverse range of growth forms. These families listed here, like agaves, aloes, crassulas, let's see, you probably know euphorbes, yuccas, they all have some species in them, sometimes all of the species, that are succulent in nature. Their growth form is fleshy stems or fleshy leaves that makes them a succulent. Sometimes in these families there are things that are not succulents. So like yucca brevifolia is the Joshua tree. That is not really succulent at all, but there are other forms of yuccas that are. And if they are, then they require some of the same propagation techniques that we're going to be discussing soon. Here's a very well-known succulent plant, the poinsettia. It's from the euphorb family. Its scientific name is Euphorbia pulcherrima. And notice on this slide how the scientific name or Latin name is italicized, whereas the common name, poinsettia, is not. Italics or underlining in written texts, it just means a foreign language is being used. So that's why it's italicized. This is Latin, it's not English. So this plant has a really important economic value. It's been had a great market in North America, even parts of Central and South America, for almost 100 years. So one family used to grow and market these, the X family, E-C-K-E-S, and they advanced and actually made this become popular. Albert Ecke immigrated from Germany to LA in around 1900, and he opened an orchard in the Eagle Rock area, and he started developing this grafting technique that made the plants more full and attractive. And up until about the 1980s and even 1990s, that Ecke family had pretty much monopolized the poinsettia industry. They had their beautiful, more attractive plants from their grafting technique, and everyone wanted those above all others. So it was not until like the late 1980s that another researcher, university researcher, was able to understand and figure out this similar method and then published it, and then lots of growers were able to now produce these really beautiful bushy, short, stout plants that were so marketable. So one of the things that you do with this plant is you have to subject it to darkness to get these bracts to turn red. So what you're looking at when you look at the thing that you think is the flower, the red flower, it's actually not. Those little yellow things in the center are the flowers. Those red things are called a bract, B-R-A-C-T, and they they connect just under the flower, so they undergird the flower, and they will not turn red unless the plant is subjected to at least 14 hours of darkness for about a day. So it's got to have about 14 hours of darkness, 14 to 16 hours, and then you have the other 8 to 10 hours are bright sunlight, and that will make these bracts, which are normally green as the plant matures, they'll turn bright red. So that's what if you were going to go visit a poinsettia nursery, you would see them early on, somewhere early in the fall, being grown up from cuttings and grafting from one poinsettia cultivar to another. You join those two, and then those are stout, green, bushy plants grown up in a greenhouse, and then they're subjected to a particular amount of darkness that makes them turn red. There's a really interesting plant. There's a lot of other things to it. It's a toxic plant, so all parts of it are toxic and should not be ingested. Got to be careful with those. They have that kind of milky sap, which isn't good for you. The poinsettia was used by Aztecs in ancient times to produce a red dye and for medicinal purposes. The Nahuatl language of the Aztecs gave the flower part of its name. So it's got a really interesting economic and cultural history to it. And it's our example of, in this lecture, an example of a euphorbia that has a succulent that can be can be propagated very readily from stem cuttings and even grafting. Another popular Euphorbia millii, or euphorbia family plant, is this crown of thorns. It pretty much looks like what you're seeing. It's a little bit, you're not seeing the base of the stem, but it's very spiny, has pretty much perennially has, so all year long has those leaves and has flowers a lot of the year in warmish climates, especially around Southern California. And there's cultivars that are pink like this, they're bright red, they're yellow, they're white, they're cream, and even green colored flowers in the center. So it's a really nice plant to have green and color a lot of the time. They're very easy to propagate. The hardest part of propagating these is cutting and handling those very spiny stems. A lot of the plants in this family, and this genus even more particularly, are toxic, so they should not be ingested, or if you touch the sap and then touch like a soft tissue, your eyes, your lips, it will not be good. It will burn and sting, and there's some toxicity internally too. So you got to be careful with these around pets and small children. But they're a beautiful plant and easy to propagate. Crown of thorns. As I'll do periodically in these lectures too, is throw in some botanical kind of terminology and information, not just about propagating plants, but just about taxonomy. So this is one of those. The Echeveria is a genus, and it contains many different species in it. Large genus, native mostly to the semi-deserts of Central America, Mexico, Northwest, South America, named after the 18th century Mexican botanical artist Anastasio Echeverria y Godoy. And a lot of people say Echeveria. I've seen it spelled different ways. It's interesting that the name of the genus is spelled differently than the name of that Mexican botanical artist. This happens in the horticulture industry. You get things changed and moved, and people don't spell it right, and sometimes that sticks. Anyways, Echeveria is the way you would normally say it, or Echeveria. And lots of really cool little compact, symmetrical succulents. So these are all propagated with some of the same types of techniques. As you probably know, succulents in general are easy to propagate in general. You break them off, you shove them in the ground, they root, usually. If you're doing it for a business though, you want to use the proper techniques and sterile techniques and other things to ensure the success of your cuttings. So you would be a little more careful than what I just described, if not a lot more careful. But they're not as tricky, of course, as doing things like we've done where you're taking passion vine stem cuttings or salvia stem cuttings or fruit tree cuttings. Not nearly as tricky as that. They're really popular right now. This is just a small selection of what's out there. Lots of different kind of colors and hues and shades and shapes and sizes. But they're very popular. We've got some that we plant in our garden on campus, and as soon as we plant them, within the next few days, people come and steal them because they're just so popular. So there's none there right now, so you can't go there and get any for free. Anyhow, I like these, and they're often used in little succulent arrangements that you might see in a pot, in a restaurant or in someone's house too. So good market value right now. Echeveria. Another common plant in the succulent group are kalanchoes, and they are part of the Crassula family. And there's two shown here, a very common house plant, Kalanchoe blossfeldiana, and on the lower right, the Kalanchoe luciae, the paddle plant, which is really popular right now as a succulent. The top one, Kalanchoe blossfeldiana, is a fairly popular house plant, but it's not quite as trendy. But they're both still have great market value. Around here in southwestern United States, you'll see a lot of Kalanchoe luciae planted, and the more sunlight it gets, the redder the tips of those leaves or paddles get. Really cool plant. Cactus and succulents can be propagated by seed. It's a slower process than by cuttings, but it's very inexpensive. And some cacti they grow as a solitary habit, so it's not as easy to propagate them by cuttings. Like if you think of like the really big low-growing barrel cactus, those are going to be pretty hard to do by cuttings, but they could be done much more easily by seed. Examples of cacti that are propagated by seed are like things like the nodo cactus shown in the image, Neoporteria, saguaro, which you've heard of, the classic Western style cactus, and cardon, which is also very well known if you live in northern Mexico. There are cardon forests down there. Gathering seeds of succulents and cacti is similar to gathering seeds from other plants. You want to make sure you get the seeds off of the plant and get all the pulp off of it so the seeds aren't left with any kind of moisture or sugary tissues around the seed, which could cause fungal or bacterial growth and rot the seeds. Euphorbia, some of them have pods. Well, they all have pods, but some of them have these pods with that pop open. So in this case, what you're seeing here, a picture of one, you might have to put a little bag over it before it pops to catch the seeds. Other succulents, like you're seeing in the bottom right, the organ pipe cactus produces these really yummy tunas or fruits on the ends of its columnar stems, and they can be harvested. Like dragon fruit is also has this type of fruit. A lot of prickly pears or opuntias have these types of fruits, and they can be harvested. Make sure you take the little bristles. There's little teeny spines called glaucids that need to be wiped or brushed or cut off. But the inside is very sweet and fleshy, and it can be eaten, but the seeds are within that, so you have to take the seeds out somehow and dry them off and get all the pulp off to be able to keep them and plant them later. Tohono O'odham people of southern, kind of south of Tucson and into northern Mexico have utilized the organ pipe fruits as a food source for millennia. And one of the ways, at least historically, the seeds were gathered as people would eat the fruits. They would gather the fruits, prepare them, eat them, and then defecate in certain areas. And later, when that had all dried, they could go back and pick the seeds out of it. And those seeds would be ready to germinate pretty readily after that. I know it sounds kind of weird to us now to do that kind of technique, but it really was smart because you get the food source and you also have the seeds go through the human digestive tract, which weakens the seed coat and enables them to imbibe water and oxygen readily when you want to plant them. And sometimes the seeds were used to make flour too by these people. We're not going to be trying that method in class, but I think it's interesting. Cleaning the chaff or pulp off the seeds is always important, even for cactus and succulents. This is no different here. Keeping them in a cool, dry place afterwards. And then sowing seeds for cactus. The seeds germinate very quickly when you have warmth and moisture. Just put them into sand that's moist and put some bottom heat, and they probably germinate pretty quickly. Or even no bottom heat. You can just have a warmish climate and atmosphere. Some are best sown later in winter, so you get maximum growth before they go dormant again if they're from a seasonal type of temperate climate. And they are slow growers, so put them into tiny pots first. You don't need to overpot them with size. That's kind of true for most plants, and whether they're from cuttings or they're from seeds, you want the pot to be in scale with the plant. Taking a little plant and putting it in a huge pot, it's strange how the plant usually doesn't do as well as when you put it in a pot that's a little more scaled to the size of that plant, or how it will grow the next few months, kind of scaled to that size. So same with cactus here. Some slight uniquenesses with the type of media you'll use for cacti. As you could guess, they like well-drained soil, like sandy soils in general. So a very free draining mix. You want to have, there's a number of recipes you could use. You could use 1 part sand to 2 parts potting mix. You could use 1 part sand or grit to 1 part potting mix to another part of maybe something else like perlite. as long as it's about half to 2/3 of really well-drained material. It could be grit, it could be sand, it could be pumice, it could be perlite, and then about 1/3 to a half of something that's a little more moisture holding, like peat or potting mix. Propagating them by seed involves an environment that is warmer than other environments, but not very different than our perennial cuttings of just stem cuttings, so a little bit warmer. Around 80, a little over 80 degrees would be better. Usually we do all our other types of cuttings, the non-succulent and cactus cuttings, we do around 75 degrees. You could go a little higher, 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher for cactus and succulents. Most of the seeds germinate in a couple of weeks. And just don't get it too hot. Over 92 degrees Fahrenheit has been known to decrease germination for cactus and succulent seeds, mainly cactus. But you can see here on the upper left, a seed, when its seed germinates, you don't just get a new little shoot and leaf, you get a little pad or succulent leaf, so it's got this cool little sprout that comes up. All right, let's shift to asexual propagation of cactus and succulents, and that is done through stem cuttings. It's a very easy way to get more succulents and more cacti. Usually the cactus and succulents that have longer stems and grow well are good candidates for taking cuttings from. Almost all cactus and succulents are fairly easy to take cuttings from. The cuttings don't wilt like they do with other perennials, but they are susceptible to rotting because you have a big wet surface area. So by the nature of the fact that something's a succulent or cactus, it has a big fleshy stem. So when you cut through it, you've got a big wet wound, and that is a big area for pathogens to enter into that cutting and make it rot. So the sharper your tool, the better. So you have a cleaner cut rather than if you just ripped off a stem of a succulent that you liked. It would have a very jagged wound, and that would have a high surface area. So a clean, sharp tool will minimize the surface area for bacterial and fungal pathogen entry. Sometimes you can take suckers and offsets that are cut cleanly off of the mother plant. Those grow on the sides, and those are good for divisions too, for cactus and succulent. Some examples of cacti and some succulents that you can take for cuttings. Prickly pears and choyas have nice pads that they can be cut off and rooted. Columnar cacti, you can take sections of the column, like cereus. You've heard of, saguaro. Well, doesn't grow around here, but the ones that grow long and linear, kind of columnar shape. There's also San Pedro cactus that's got a nice columnar shape, and those are all good. Trichocereus, those are all great for taking cuttings from sections of those columns. Pincushion or globular cacti are the ones that form these small, stout kind of little stool or mound-like shape. Those are a little harder, but you can cut off some of the sections, and for things like euphorbia and kalanchoe, you can cut off branches and root them. So stem cuttings are done in a similar fashion to other herbaceous and woody cuttings. Used for cactus and succulent, ripe stems that have lost their bright juvenile color are better than taking the really young growth. So you want semi-ripe or ripe tissue. It's a little harder to tell on a cactus, but in general, try not to take it right from the tip, in other words. Early spring growth, after the growth has just started, you would take those more ripe tissues. So not taking the early spring growth, but at that time of the year is when you would take the semi-ripe and ripe tissues. They're usually, 4 inches-ish long, sharp, sterile blade. And here's the technique that's the most different, that sets apart cactus and succulent propagation from other types and methods, is letting it callus. So it's like you take that cutting, you can taking a cutting of anything, and then you let that sit for a week or two in a warm, dry, shady location with good circulation, and that wound, that cut end, scabs over. It's called a callus, and it kind of seals itself off, and at that point, when it's sealed off, you would then put it into the media for propagation. So you don't want to put it directly, that big wet cut wound, directly into media, because then it might rot. Usually you don't need a rooting hormone. Keep it the media slightly moist using the media recipes already mentioned. And in a few weeks, and if you got some bottom heat, even better, it will form roots off of that cut section. A couple of pictures of columnar cacti taken. On the left, you're seeing the sections were taken. It looks like they were not taken in early spring because this is not really fresh new growth, but it can still work. Cactus and succulent cuttings, as you probably already know, are very forgiving. It's very easy to do them and go wrong. But this is one step where you should be careful. So you take the cuttings and then let them sit for a week or so till you get that brown kind of dried scab over the wound. That's the callus. And then put them in the media. A few weeks later, you might see rooting like you're seeing here in the right picture. A little more information on the media you could use. You could also use 100% perlite or 100% sand or 100% pumice, very well drained, just to get the roots started. And then once you get some roots, then you can add some organic matter, which adds a little bit of nutrients, a little bit of water holding capacity. Gritty cactus soil mix can be purchased. That's really expensive to buy in a bag called cactus mix, where you can really make it yourself very easily. Don't use beach sand though. It has a lot of salts in it. It takes a lot to clean that up. So buying bag sand, or if you have a source of like river sand. This slide is also explaining the fact that you could put just a layer of something heavier, like fine grit or sand on the top layer of your pot that you're putting the succulent or cactus cutting into, just so it's bulky, like that sand would hold that stem up. And you can insert it deep enough so it supports it, but not so deep that it rots. Here are a few recipes, again, of cactus and succulent soils or media. Adding bone meal helps all of these succulents to promote root growth and later to bloom. And watering is good. In the fall and winter, they should be watered very little. They should stay dry. In the spring and summer, they can be moistened, usually watered about once every couple of weeks. Less common, but sometimes people choose to do propagation by leaf cuttings. Most succulents can be propagated by leaves. Things like Sansevieria, it's called snake plant, these Crassula family plants, Gasteria, those all can be propagated by leaves. Jade plant is one of them too, very common house plant and outdoor landscape plant around here. With most of those that can be propagated by leaves, you usually have to have a little bit of the mother tissue. So the leaf is connected to the stem, and you want to get a little bit of that stem tissue as part of the cutting. If you take just the leaf and the petiole and you put it in some media, you might let it callus first, it will root, but it will never grow to be more than a leaf. You'll have a leaf with roots. The leaf might get a little bigger, but that's it. It'll stay a one-leaf plant, which is an oddity, and it could be interesting, but not very marketable. So get a little bit of that mother tissue from the stem that the leaf came off of, and then it will have a node and a bud, and it will grow other branches. Some other forms of asexual reproduction, propagating these cactus and succulents. They have their own ways of asexually reproducing. I've mentioned some of them before, but plants can produce these offsets. They're little baby clone pups that are connected to the mama plant, and they're growing just set off slightly from the parent plant, and they start to form their own roots, and they can be cut off, and you can have divisions from them. Bulbils are small plants formed on the above ground portion of a plant, so they might form on the edges of the leaves or on the flowering stalk after seeds have been produced, which is very unusual. I'll show you a picture of that. It's not unusual in the world of agaves, but it's kind of a unique way of asexual reproduction. Other plantlets can form. Kalanchoe, there's one plant, a kalanchoe called Mother of Millions, and on the edges of the leaves, little baby plants form, and those can fall off and grow into new plants. They're all genetically identical to the parent plant. Had to show you a picture of this plant. Kalanchoe houghtonii. It's interesting. You can see the little baby plantlets forming on the edges of the leaves, and then the bottom left picture, you can even see the plantlets start to form roots before they fall off of the mother plant. So really cool plant. I know people that have these and want them and have them as houseplants, but when I worked for the Forest Service, we did a lot of plant propagation of desert species because I was situated in Big Bear, and we did a lot of work in the Mojave Desert. And people that had greenhouses that were growing cactus and succulents, these were weeds that would invade their greenhouses, and then they would just produce all these plantlets over and over and over, and they would be covering the floor of the greenhouse. So they were a problem because they were so successful at asexual reproduction. Just a short list of some plants that produce offsets by which you can propagate them asexually through divisions. Here's a picture of a rather sickly looking velvet agave, Agave attenuata. But it's a great picture showing you that when the mother plant starts to die, this one probably already has blossomed. It's the foxtail agave, also known as that. But you can see the little pups, offsets forming on the bottom that will produce new clones of that same parent plant. Here's another agave that I saw in Palm Springs, and I actually don't know the exact species of it, but it was a good example of bulbil production. So here it is before it's blooming. There was a bunch of different ones of these exact same type or species in an area. So this is a picture of one before it's blooming, and then I'll show you ones that show you while they're blooming that were nearby. So here's one after it bloomed. So it sent up the flowering stalk, and it put out flowers that produced seeds, and then after the seeds fell out, these things called bulbils start to form where the seeds were, so on the flowering stalk. And this is a close-up of those bulbils that are forming on the flowering stalk itself. You can see them. They are little baby plants, and sometimes roots form off of them too. And then if that flowering stalk falls over or these fall to the ground, then that plant is now spreading its clones around. So it's a form of reproduction. So you might not have ever thought about this before, but why would plants have asexual reproduction? Why would they need to be doing this? Why not just produce seeds and the seeds fall down or get moved around and some of them grow, and that way, its species is able to persist over time? Well, it's thought that if the asexual reproduction is a way, especially for plants that are living in kind of a harsh climate or in periods of the year or times when there are maybe low pollinators, low amounts of water, things that keep it from being able to sexually reproduce. Anything that affects its pollinator species is going to affect its ability to produce seeds. So it's thought that some plants in certain situations, over thousands, millions of years, were exposed to so many periods of time when it was hard for them to produce seeds that they developed or started to emphasize this asexual means of reproduction. So put it in a more succinct way, asexual reproduction, like these clones and bulbil formation, are a mode for the plant to keep its species alive in times when seed production is not easy, or is difficult, or not possible. And this way you get a lot more plants producing a lot more bulbils that when conditions get good again to produce seeds, you'll have a bunch of plants of that species still around. This is just a picture of 3 of the bulbils I pulled off and put them on a rock just so you can see what they look like. And all of these could be easily propagated, just put into some media, even without callousing. Another short list of plants that produce bulbils and plantlets. Actually, there's another one on here we had in a Lifescape garden called the Furcrea, which I'll show you next, and that's also one that produces bulbils. Here's a plant that produces bulbils similar to the agave. It's Furcrea MacDougalii. That's a good mouthful there, MacDougalii. It is a monocarpic plant in the asparagus family. So asparagus family. It used to be known as the lily family, so it'd be things like the agaves, yuccas, lilies, all in the same family, a very similar type of flower. And there's been kind of more recently determined that things like asparagus also fit into that same family with similar types of flowers. But what does monocarpic means? It just means that this plant will reproduce one time in its life. So this plant, if you look at the bottom portion, it kind of looks like an agave, up on a trunk there. Lots of long spiky leaves coming out from one central point. So we had this in the Lifescape Garden on campus for about 25 years. It slowly grew up like an agave on a stick, its trunk got bigger and bigger. And for about 25 years, like I said, and then about 8 years ago, it sent up this big flowering stalk that makes the whole thing twice as tall. So the whole plant was about 12 feet tall, and then now with the flowering stalk, it went up to about 25 feet tall. And it produced tons of seeds first, and then the seeds fell off, and then all the bulbils formed on top of that flowering stalk. And we got thousands of bulbils. And we saved a few, but really the Furcrea is just an oddity, an example of a plant that produces bulbils on its flowering stalk for asexual reproduction. And this kind of makes sense, it has one shot. So what happened here is, again, it was growing for about 25 years, no flower, sends up this flowering stalk. Within 6 months, it's done everything. It's flowered, it's made seed, it's produced bulbils, and then it's done, and the whole thing dies. So that's what monocarpic means. And it kind of makes sense in this case that if you're a plant that's only going to bloom and reproduce once, you should do the asexual reproduction and the sexual and just do everything you can, because then you're going to be gone. So that's just an example there. And here's a general guide to propagation methods for specific types of plants within the cactus and succulent kind of greater grouping. So this is just something I pulled off the internet, easily accessible to you when you want to propagate a cactus or succulent type of plant. You can find out this general information and easy to find out even more detailed information on techniques that will work well for you.